So welcome back, everybody. I thought I'd talk, and as Sally said, this has been a really interesting read for me because there is a lot of information about the author and about um, her writing process. It's a little bit about her. She was an academic. She was a social researcher. So she basically did things of, why do people do what they do and what makes people happy, that sort of thing. And she had done a lot of academic writing. She then went in, she did her first nonfiction book and then a memoir, and this is her first novel. Now
Hmm.
she has since come out with a new novel that's coming out this year. And it's related. It's called The Bookbinder,
Mhm.
and it's set in World War One. And she calls it a companion piece because it's
Mhm.
still talking about books and words and that sort of thing, but it's not a continuation of this story. Um, one of the things she lives in Australia. She's from England originally. I thought I'd read. Somebody asked her, "What is your idea of the perfect day?" And when I read it, I thought, she is a journeywoman. Because she says, walking in the old town of just about any town in Italy, grabbing an espresso from the nearest bar, then slowly walking the narrow streets until I come across some subtle reminder that life has been lived in the place for millennia. I would let my fingertips trace the contours of colored tile or faded fresco or sculptured stone and imagine a woman about my age doing the same 100 years before, 300 years before, 1,000 years before. I would wonder how our lives are different and how they are the same. Then I would find another bar and pay the premium for an outside table and spend most of my day writing, drinking coffee, and eating. I would observe the life around me, the locals, the tourists, and the beggars, and I would jot down thoughts, start a letter to a friend, write a page or two in my journal. I might work on my next novel, or I might not. On my perfect day, I would feel no compulsion and no guilt. I would meet my partner for dinner and we would eat something with truffles. And I thought, after hearing that, I thought, that's exactly my perfect day.
Yeah.
It's
Wow.
that,
Right.
Yeah, that's lovely.
yeah. And I thought that really sort of told me a lot about her. Um, and so the other thing about this particular book, it's being made into a television series in Australia, which so we will probably be able to catch it on PBS at some point. Um, but so that'll be interesting to be able to sort of see the book from the author's perspective and from the from the sculpture of the lens of the camera. So
Mm.
so let's start off with the typical things, favorite passages. And I'll start with mine. And mine is kind of a weird one. It's after she's found out she's pregnant and she's going to live with in Bath, and her father takes her to the train station. And here's what it says. 2 weeks later, Da stood with me on the platform, waiting for the train that would take me towards Bath. I thought about every conversation we had had since Diddy emerged from our drawing room and gave me the nod to go in and speak with him. We had said so little. Gestures and sighs had punctuated our interactions. He had touched my face and held my funny fingers whenever words failed him. I knew how much he wished that Lily was there and how he thought that if she had been, things would be different. I knew he thought he had failed me rather than me failing him. But he said none of it, and so I could only return his affection with a touch of my own. When the train came, he carried my trunk into the second class carriage and settled me into a seat by the door. He might have said something then, but there were 3 others already seated around me. He kissed my forehead, stepped out into the corridor, but he didn't leave immediately. He smiled a sad smile, and I suddenly realized that I could come home completely changed, that contrary to what Diddy had promised, my path, whatever it was, had already been diverted. I stood up then and wrapped my arms around him. He held me until the whistle blew.
Wow.
And I like that because I think you know, the story doesn't really talk a lot about their relationship. I mean, it skirts around it, but it doesn't really talk about it. And I thought, this was it was a trying time for both of them. but I thought it really said something about the kind of quiet relationship that they had, and the strong love that he had for her. I think showed through in that passage. Anybody else have other favorite areas of the book they wanted to share? Yep, Mary.
I loved that well, there were several different passages, of course, that I liked, but the one where she spent so much time under the table. And I, this one, I thought I could just picture this scene of this young child. I loved waiting beneath the sorting table for each pair of shoes to return. At the end of the summer of the year I turned 11, Mr. Mitchell's feet failed to appear. I waited to see green-socked ankle crossed over a pale blue pant, but there was a gap where Mr. Mitchell usually sat. The other feet seemed limp, and even though Mr. Swetman's shoes tapped up and down, they were tuneless. I could just, she's under there looking around, and then the words come to her.
Yeah.
It just seemed like that was a lot of the story.
Yeah, it's like her world was under the table. She knew these people by their shoes.
Yeah, and their feet tapping, their little idiosyncrasies.
Yeah.
And how expressive, because if I recall correctly, the reason he wasn't there was because he died in a climbing accident.
Yes.
And of course, she wouldn't have known that, but the other people at the table would have known that, and their feet were limp. I mean, how expressive is that of that loss?
Yep.
That their feet were limp.
And tapping, but it's tuneless. So
yeah,
he's something's not right.
I found it so interesting that, and I have a favorite passage that I'll mention in a minute, but that's just struck my head, is that I found so interesting that I read some of the interviews with her, and the author, and she she didn't say the word dyslexic or anything like that, but she definitely spoke about how she struggled with words growing up. She struggled to spell them, she struggled to order them, and yet she was always fascinated that words could be used to create these beautiful passages, but it didn't come naturally or easy to her. It was something she had to work for. And she has such beautiful writing. So she's got it right. I mean, it's just such beautiful writing. My favorite passages were actually a series of 3 passages, and they were the letters that Gareth wrote from the war front. And they kind of progressed. The first one was almost like a holiday letter. He was talking about all these young men who'd never traveled out of England before. A lot of them were working class men who would never have had those opportunities to travel, and how they were, in the countryside in Europe and flirting with the women and had no idea of what was in store for them. And then the second letter really brings home the reality of war, and the third one was just before he went over the wire for the final time. And all 3 letters are just beautifully written, both individually and taken as a series. But this is from the second letter, where he says, "I'm beginning to feel the English language is burdened by this war, S. Everyone I meet has a new word for toilet paper, and I've not heard one that doesn't accurately convey its origin or the experience of using it. Yet only a handful of words exist to convey 1,000 horrors. Horror, it's war-weary. It's the word we use when we have no words. Perhaps some things are not meant to be described, at least not by the likes of me. A poet, perhaps, could arrange words in a way that creates the itch of fear or the heaviness of dread. They could make an enemy of mud and damp boots and raise your pulse just at the mention of them. A poet might be able to push this word or that to mean something more than what has been ordained by our dictionary men. I am not a poet, my love. The words I have are pale and slight against the hulking force of this experience. I can tell you it is wretched, that the mud is muddier, the damp damper, the sound of a flute played by a German soldier more beautiful and more melancholy than any sound I have ever heard."
Lovely.
And that made me think, he's saying he's not a poet, but his words are so beautiful, and perhaps that's a mirror of what she experienced as she grew to work with words.
She also talks about the fact that the dictionary, that at one point in her life, she realized that the dictionary, which she always thought of as being the facts, she realized was subjective,
Mhm.
that it was actually written, and I'll quote her, it was actually written by, she said she never thought about the dictionary as being subjective. It was all written by educated Victorian old white men who had never
Mhm.
slaved over a kitchen. They'd never been in a coal mine. So, they really were a very subjective group of men choosing what those words should be. And she said that because of that, that's when she started thinking about, well, what about the other words that didn't meet their criteria? And that's how this idea of the book came about for her. So, now, has anybody ever been to Oxford before? And anything about the book remind you of Oxford, Linda?
Yeah.
I haven't been to Oxford in about 30 years. So, yes, I have to admit I'm not very well prepared today. And this is my first book club. I've never to
well,
your group.
welcome.
Well,
So
thank you.
welcome. Sorry, I thought you'd been here before.
I
We
did
usually do
too.
a whole introduction.
Yes.
No, that's just fine. But the last time I was in Oxford, I wanted to go to the Bodleian Library, and it was not open at that time for general tours. So the only way I was able to get a tour was because I happened to be a member of the Canadian Library Association. I was a librarian, and it was only because of that particular connection that I was considered worthy to go to the library. So that whole notion of exclusiveness, it kind of ties in with this book, that only people who have genuine academic links are entitled to participate in institutions, and in this case, in an interpretation of language. So no, I don't have particular memories connected to Oxford with the book, but it's just the general tone of it.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring up the whole idea of academia, because I've run into that as well, because there are many collections that I would like to see, but I don't have, and I have academic credentials, but not in the field that's required to access them. So there's all this information that's available in England, but you have to have the credentials to be able to see it. Whereas I think in the US and in Canada, it's really, the information is there for people to come see, much more so, and not nearly as exclusive of the knowledge base.
Hmm.
And Linda, you are from Canada?
I am. I'm in Calgary.
Calgary, okay. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm in Montgomery, Alabama, and Sally, who's our other co-host, is in Australia,
Ah,
outside of Sydney, right?
Yes, just north of Sydney, little way north.
Yeah.
okay. All these different time zones.
Yes. And so typically this is what we do. We just pull up a question and everybody discusses it. This is a very small group tonight. We typically have, well, at least
A
8
dozen
to
or
10
so.
people. So yeah, it was.
I
So
admit
tonight,
that's what I was anticipating. So I thought, oh, I read this book about a year ago and I didn't have time to reread it. So I thought, that's
Yes.
okay. I can just lie back in the
yes,
weeds.
of course.
But
And
with 5 of us, I guess I better try to
Yeah.
participate a little more actively.
We're very friendly and very forgiving. So
and Linda, we're very laid back. There's at every club, there's some people who haven't read the book at all.
Yeah.
Haven't even started it, or they've started and they haven't finished,
Yeah.
and there's no expectation that anyone has to do homework for it. So you're very welcome.
No, thank you.
The relationship between Esme and her father blossoms as she accompanies him to work every day. Do you think they would have been as close if Lily were still alive? And how do you think Esme's life may have been different if Lily were still alive? Lily being her mother.
I think that it would be very unlikely they would be as close if her mother was alive. I mean, just that fact of being taken to work every day and sitting under the table, Mary, that would be very unlikely to have happened in a 2-parent family at that time. And I think that, there would have been more distance between a father and a daughter, particularly. I wasn't of a very close to my father, but I think perhaps the only personal kind of one-on-one memories. I'm the youngest of 6 children, and the only personal one-on-one memories I have with him are when he took me to work with him, which was very, very seldom. And I remember him taking me to. He worked for a account. I'm not quite sure what you call this in the Americas, a municipality or a local council, local government.
Yep.
He worked in the engineering, their roads department, and he took me once to inspect the trucks. He had to inspect all the trucks for cleanliness and maintenance and so on. And I went with him, and I've never forgotten it, because that was one of the very few kind of one-on-one personal interactions I had with him, one person to another. I must have been 6 at the time. And so I would imagine that relationship couldn't have been the same if she had a mother and she was spending all day in a family home.
Yeah, I would say
She would have been, I would think she would have been in the kitchen. The mother would have been, she would have been cooking. She would have been helping with fold the clothes, do the clothes, do all that. Yeah. Because
and
even
mother,
in the 60s, that's what I would be doing. I wasn't hanging out with my dad. So.
And I think her mother wouldn't have let her go out there. That's for the men. That's not for you to be doing, right?
And the men probably, her father's colleagues probably wouldn't have allowed her to come. I mean, this was clearly an allowance that was being made for him because he had no one to look after his child. And I've just thought of something this instant. If her mother was still alive, she probably would have had siblings.
Yep.
She probably wouldn't have been an only child at that time.
Yep. Although the book's about women's words and the bonds between women and the spaces women occupy, there are also male characters that play meaningful roles as allies. Do the men like Bill, Gareth, and Esme's father support her? And what about the other lexicographers in the scriptorium? What about the other men in the book?
Well, tell me if I'm talking too much.
There are only 5 of us. We can talk as much as we like.
I mean, Gareth clearly supported her because he was making the book for her.
Yeah,
right. So that was huge.
That was beautiful. I think that making of that book was really an indication that he got her. Like he and also got that, although they were living in the same world, because he was a man and she was a woman, their worlds were very different. That experience of having a book probably never would have been open to her if he hadn't done that. So yeah, he was an amazing ally.
What about
but
Bill?
even Bill, poor old Bill, who never knew that he got her pregnant. And we know he sort of did the right thing by the other woman that he got pregnant, so they probably would have ended up married if he'd known. I mean, he was also their sexual relationship was quite beautiful, even though it wasn't a relationship based on love. It was a relationship based on, it seemed an almost anachronistically modern relationship of a kind of a sexual interaction based on friendship and respect and enjoyment.
And I love that part where it talks about how Mabel's vulgarities, the woman in the woman who she reminded me of Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady. But it said that Mabel's vulgarities were turned into something beautiful. All those the words that were described by Mabel when Bill was affectionate with her. And I thought that was really, it was kind of a sweet, like you said, Sally, it turned it into a sweet moments.
One of the things too about the words and gathering the words from the different people that she had, Mabel was one, and her caretaker, I'm sorry, I'm really, is it Lizzie? What's
Lizzie?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting with Lizzie. I mean, when Lizzie saw her name as being quoted, the pride that she felt, that, oh, look, here's where you were the ones who told me what this word means. And I thought that was really interesting that it's that not only was it validating the words these women said, but it was validating them.
And that's interesting because Lizzie actually, before Gareth makes the book, I mean, Lizzie actually, I think, calls Esme up on that at one point, because Esme is collecting the words and just putting them in that trunk under the bed. And there was a scene, I can't remember exactly where it was, but where it became apparent that I think it was Mabel believed that her words were going to be put in the dictionary.
Yeah.
And Esme was like, but I never said that. And Lizzie was said, but this is what you've led these women to believe. Like, you've almost collected these words under a kind of and not a conscious pretense that she's going to do this, but she was misleading the women into believing that these contributions that they were making of the words were going to be recognized and acknowledged in a form like the dictionary. So I think at that point, and she was Esme was a little bit unconscious, of kind of social status differences and what other people were experiencing. And I guess that's something that we can, I've worked my university degree from a million years ago is anthropology, and it's something that we have to be aware of, that you go into places and you think you're this disinterested observer, but actually, in a sense, we are exploiting other people's life experiences. And I think Gareth saved that situation because he did make it possible for those women's words to be acknowledged the way they deserve to be.
So
I'm gonna ask a question.
sure.
I think the whole thing started with the word bondmaid
Yes.
that she found on the floor, as I remember.
Yeah.
And the articles about the book, what I read was that bondmaid had been left out of the dictionary, which triggered the writer to write the story.
Yeah.
But what was slightly unclear to me was bondmaid accidentally on the floor and she found it and she kept it, and is that what prevented it from being in the dictionary? Or would the men have left it out of the dictionary anyway because it was not a word that was important to them?
That's a great question, because the whole idea of the bondmaid, I mean, in factual life or in historical documents, there was a historical document that said that there was a letter that was sent to Dr. Murray saying, why was this left out? And he responded, that was an error. That's the only word that was left out of the dictionary. Now, but they never acknowledged, was it by accident or was it on purpose? And so in the book, we don't really know because it fell on the floor. So does that mean that it happened to fall off the table and therefore fell on the floor? But yet she at one point says, well, they were throwing it away. So I don't know whether they, crumpled up and threw it on the floor because they didn't want it, or did it actually truly just fall off the table? In either case, we don't really know the actual, even in the story, we don't know exactly how it got into our hands, other than it was on the floor. So we don't know which of the answers it is.
My interpretation until now that we're having the discussion and I'm thinking about it more deeply, my interpretation was that it was accidental. My interpretation was that when what was his name, Dr. Murray, the kind of leader of the band of lexicographers, with his reaction when he found that it was missing. My interpretation was that it was accidental. But yeah, you're correct. It's never completely spelled out, is it?
But then she was accused later and in
Yes.
trouble for sort of stealing words.
Yeah.
And to me, there's sort of a mystery about that too. I mean, did she take them off of the shelf, or because I listened to the book, so I can't go back and
Yeah.
Yeah.
look through, which I wish I could now. But I have to say, listening to it gave such a richness because of the different dialects and accents. But there was a period, where she was persona non grata because they
Taken.
found out that some words were
Mm.
missing, or they looked in her pockets. I think that was it.
I didn't get the impression that she was taking words. I got the impression that she was retrieving words that were being thrown out.
Oh, okay.
I thought it was a bit of
That's what-
both. I think she was taking words.
Hmm.
I think she was on the borderline. I think that she knew when that Bond made,
Well, not the Monmouth one, but I'm talking about
but
the ones
but
that
later
was
on.
yeah, that was, but I mean, I think that was the first one, and I think that I think yes, she was taking, especially as she grew to being an adult, she was taking and looking for words that were being discarded.
Yeah.
But I think when it started, I mean, we've got to remember she was a little child, so she's a bit of an unreliable narrator. I mean, she was a little child. I think she knew with that first word that maybe it was being thrown away and that justified her taking it, but she was very secretive about it, and I think she knew she was doing something she shouldn't be doing. And I think when she was a child, she was taking words that she knew she shouldn't be taking.
But I
They
think
weren't
later on
completely
she
being
was,
thrown in the bin. But later
I think,
on, yeah.
yeah, later on, I think she was taking those that were in the bin. And I think it's interesting because to me, what I found fascinating, one of the things I found fascinating was the whole process they went through. That they had these readers that were reading books and coming up with words, and how they put them in the little pigeonholes. And once they got enough reliable sources that used that word, then it became an official word. But if a source was not reliable, then they would throw it out. And I think it's those that were not reliable sources that she was gathering.
Yeah, absolutely. As she got older, I just think at the very beginning there was a little bit of her being. I mean, I was a naughty girl, and I used to steal things when I was that age. So maybe I'm imposing my own lived experience of kind of pilfering things that didn't belong to me when I was that age, where it's not intended. Have people here had a look at the actual JourneyWoman webpage that Carolyn put together? There's a fabulous photograph from inside that room with
Yes.
all the
Yeah.
you've seen it, yeah, with all those slips of paper in those pigeonholes. It's amazing.
Actually, that's one thing I really enjoyed about the book, is that you really do get a sense of the period. And with these pigeonholes and all the little bits of paper, it's so analog, so that from our perspective today, I just think it's delightful that people were able to accomplish these incredible things without all of this electronic media. So, I just found that so refreshing.
Me too.
And how amazing that they've still got all those pieces of paper.
Do they
They've all
really?
been stored. I believe so, because I actually had a quote from her that I pulled out at one point about her research, and she, I'm not going to search for it now because it's going to take me away from this, but that was part of her research. Now, I don't know if they've got all the slips, but she was definitely going through boxes of these old slips of paper as part of her research into writing the
Wow.
book. It is incredible.
Wonderful resource. Yeah.
Now, at one point, Esme and Lizzie go on a walking tour to restore Esme's mental and physical health. Have any of you ever traveled for health reasons?
Not exactly.
Yeah, I know I haven't.
No, not really.
I've never planned a trip because of health reasons, but I did have a trip that I had already planned, a very, like a real big, for me, epic journey, 7 weeks through solo traveling through Turkey, away from the tourist areas, which at the time I had planned that to be, I planned that itinerary as a basis for a book, which I have never written for reasons that will quickly become apparent, because my niece, who was the other journeywoman in our family, she died in a motorcycle accident in Hanoi, just less than 48 hours before I got on the plane to Turkey. And of course it was like, do I fly? Do I not fly? That journey was so not for my physical health, but I guess for my mental health, as grieving and being in that kind of shock, was probably the most healing experience that I could have had under the circumstances. So I always do think of that trip as being something that was I don't know what the words are, not travel for my health, but it was
restorative,
a very restorative experience.
Yeah, I have often
I can
wanted
see why you would do that.
I've often wanted to go to someplace, to a spa area and just, get massages and walk by the beach and, but at the same time, there's so much else stuff to see and do.
Yes.
But to spend myself just, at one place seems a waste of time. So. Now, there are connotations of, why do you think Esme left the trunk in Lizzie's room even after she grew up?
The trunk belonged to Lizzie.
Yeah.
But I think there's more to the answer to that than that, because Lizzie would have let her take it. I mean, was it a hiding place, or was it because she felt safer in that room?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, I think she did feel safe in that room, but it was also a hiding place. And maybe it was out of habit. Maybe it was.
The words were still in it, right?
Yeah. She just kept.
So maybe she wanted Lizzie on some level to find it, right? Is that?
But Lizzie knew it was there all the time.
And could Lizzie read? I can't remember. I don't know. Lizzie couldn't read.
I got the impression that she could not. Yeah.
Maybe it was just
because
a secure place, a safe place.
Yeah.
What do you think, Wendy?
Well, I don't know. I think it also it was secure, it was safe, it was a good hiding place. But I think there was something about their relationship also that Lizzie was a little bit in on it. Like, she knew about all the stuff that happened. I mean, she had been helped become an orchestrator of her to gather new words from new people. So it was, although Esme was doing the work, Lizzie was kind of helping to facilitate it. So I looked at it as sort of being their project. And that's why it was left in her room.
Lizzie also put some kind of limits on what she got Esme to agree when Esme was little, on what words she could collect and what words she couldn't collect. Like, I think she helped Lizzie, going back to that earlier discussion point that Eleanor raised, that where which words could Lizzie collect? Could they be discarded? Could they be pilfered? At the beginning, I think that Lizzie was putting some kind of limits on what Esme could collect. But it is strange that, when Esme had her own house, that she didn't take the trunk with her. Like, after her father died and she had the house to herself, there was a period, I think, or sorry, maybe it's after her husband died, where she had her own house, and yet she still didn't take the trunk there.
Maybe there was an factor.
Sorry, Linda?
Maybe there was an incubation factor that leaving it where it was until something triggered the need to get it back.
Well, and then the other thing is, those words were not necessarily words that Lizzie or that Esme used. or they were not part of Esme's life.
Yeah. Interesting.
They were part of Lizzie's life.
That's a good point. And
Yeah.
also they're the two girls or the two
Yeah.
women, and they're kind of together.
Yes.
And if she left it someplace else, it's not their, like you said, their project.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I thought, and quite frankly, I found a lot of the words very interesting that she found. I mean, some are words that we still, well, that are still in use today, but others are not. And it was interesting to see, you know, sort of the derivation of the words and what their meanings were. Now, the author lives in England, or was born in England. She lives in Australia. And she chose to include, and you're going to have to tell me, Sally, is it Karuna?
It's Ghana, more or
Karna
less. Ghana,
language
almost like a G sound here. Ghana language.
in her epilogue. And did this acknowledgement of Aboriginal Australians add significance to the book? Now, I will tell you right now that it didn't even enter my head until I saw your question. And then it was like,
Same here.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, it triggered when I saw the question, it made me think that how, you know, I don't know the exact number, but thousands of languages around the world are disappearing, you know, every year. And that if one doesn't record those words,
Yeah.
that's what it triggered in me, that we have to make sure that all these languages are saved. The words are saved. I don't know. What did you think, Sally, being in Australia?
Yeah, so for me, I kind of snuck this question in because for me it was really interesting. It brought up a lot of things. There's a lot of content here. Perhaps before I say anything, I don't know if anyone else had any thoughts on it or yeah, so something, I mean, we're actually going through a very tricky period in Australia right now. We had a national referendum last week with a heartbreakingly disappointing result, which was about giving Aboriginal Australians something called the voice, which is to enshrine in our constitution that there should be provision for some kind of advisory body or input from Aboriginal Australians in to our parliament, and that was defeated last week.
Really? Wow.
So yeah, so that is so this author is Australian, although she was born in the UK. Something that is very important for us as Australians is that I don't really do it here because I'm the only Australian in this group. But if I had any interaction like this in Australia, I would always start with acknowledging the Aboriginal land that I'm sitting on and that I write on. And this is something that is also a bit contentious now because there are some people, the same people who argued for the no vote, are sort of arguing against doing that. So it was interesting to see that she did include that because it is a very Australian part of life, that any kind of academic gathering or government meeting or public event of any kind would almost always start with an acknowledgement, either a welcome from an Aboriginal person, or if there's no Aboriginal person there who can do that welcome to their own country, an acknowledgement by the other people that we're standing on their land. But specifically, the Ghana language is interesting because the Ghana language was almost lost. And as you say, Mary, and there is a situation where, because of a couple of German missionaries back in the day, recorded hundreds and hundreds of Ghana words in a kind of dictionary, I guess. And so again, there's this interesting discussion of these languages are being lost, like Pip Williams is talking about the women's words being lost in the Victorian era and not being included in the dictionary. And who are recording these words? And you know, it's this kind of irony that we're relying on these words that have been saved by German missionaries, and there's a great appreciation for this having happened, but also that kind of irony of the historical circumstances that because of the extent of colonialism in Australia that you're having to rely on those kind of external sources. So there's a lot of interesting things about Aboriginal Australian languages, and I think there's some kind of parallels towards
Well, I think
women's
part of it,
words.
because we can talk about that even in North America with some of the indigenous people in North America, that their languages have been lost, or what has saved them is when they've been written down.
Mm.
So when we talk about a language, it's that the act of having it been written down somewhere is what solidifies it. And for those languages that were not written in a language that we can see or understand, those are the ones that have such a potential to be lost.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of ties in with the book itself, is that, it's only the written word that ended up in the dictionaries.
And also who was writing those words down,
Yeah.
and why did they choose the words that they did choose
Yeah.
to write down? So it would be interesting, and I don't know enough about it I know almost nothing about it, but it would be interesting to know, for example, if these words that have been recorded of Kaurna language, for example, how many of them are about the women's world from Kaurna people in that time, and how many, or was there only kind of those mainstream male-dominated words that were recorded?
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
that
if I
gives
could
us,
Yeah.
because we're talking about how dictionaries are an expression of their times. And that does remind me of a book by Robert Macfarlane, a British nature writer, who wrote The Lost Words intended for children, because he had found that the most recent dictionary was leaving out nature words like acorn, and instead putting in words related to digital technology, so that the children were not even encountering some of the nature words. They'd been displaced.
Interesting.
What's the title of that again? That sounds good. That sounds interesting.
It's called
might write
Lost
that.
Words. I don't quote me on that, but I think it is The Lost
The
Words.
Lost Words.
Yeah, Robert Macfarlane. It's a large illustrated book, beautiful illustrations. But this concept that our vocabulary places us somewhere on the spectrum of time.
Yep. Yeah. Interesting.
And I don't really think, I consult, there are not many days when I don't consult an online dictionary. I'm always, when I'm reading, when I'm writing, I'm always looking up words, even stuff that I've written. When I'm editing it, I look back and I think, oh, I used that word. Did I use that correctly? And I'm looking up words always, and usually in the Collins dictionary. I don't think it's ever occurred to me not to see that as an objective source of truth of some kind.
Yeah.
Even after having read this book, until we've had this conversation now, I've always said, if it doesn't have it in the dictionary, I might widen my net and look in a couple of other dictionaries if I can't find the meaning I need, but it's never occurred to me to think about who selects those words.
Yeah.
I think they're just there by magic.
The whole evolution of language, from the spelling of words to their changing meanings, it's an important theme that runs through the book. When it comes to language, are you a purist or do you embrace change? And how do you feel about regional variations? Or for those of us living in the Americas, did the UK spellings trip us up at all? And
I love when I read this question, I loved it because there was I graduated from college over like 40 years ago, I guess, in the 70s. But we had a question in my French class, the same thing with that, about being pure or not because of franglais. And at the time, or franglais, how I don't know if I'm saying it right, because, the French are just, they don't want the word hot dog in their language. And so that's just always been, I think, and Americans are so, we just, whatever, the words come and go. But I think some of those, many countries around the world they don't want English words in, in their language. So,
Well, some countries have, and I think France might be one of them, actually have a body, an
Yeah,
academy
department.
right,
Yeah.
they do.
that determines, and I believe are
Mhm.
quite conservative and very strict about any
Right.
changes to language. Am I correct? I feel
Yeah,
like
I
this is
think that
something I
sounds
heard years
right.
and years ago.
That sounds right.
Well, I will tell you, I think I probably am a purist. And I say that because when I'm grading papers, different papers for my students.
What's
And
your
then-
subject, Wendy? I was wondering what,
Yeah,
because you
my-
said you
Yeah,
taught.
I teach supply chain, but I
Oh.
also teach international business. But supply chain, purchasing,
Very good.
production planning, manufacturing, and
Uh-huh.
and global business. But when I grade papers, it drives me crazy because the word, and one word that for whatever reason just gets me, is the word usage. Not instead of using, utilize, or there's instead of using a very simple word, there's a new word that's being used. And it's like, no, just let's get back to the standard correct way of doing it. And so I do find myself probably being more of a purist, at least in the written word. I am much more forgiving in the spoken word.
But how about texts and all
Oh,
the
yes,
the what LMK? Let me
Yeah.
know. And
Yeah.
and for the longest time I thought LOL was different. What is it?
Laughing
out
out
loud.
Laugh
loud.
out loud.
Out, and I thought it was lots of love for
Yeah.
forever.
And emojis, even
Yeah,
emojis now.
That's totally that seems like that's really gonna pollute the language.
Yes.
Well,
Well, and
I think we're going to have a whole generation that doesn't know how to write at all, except in short texts and emojis.
Mhm.
But back to the language and changes. I remember I took, I guess it was sort of an etymology class with a very straight English professor. And it was talking about the way that the English language changed with the influence of the Celts or the Celts, however you pronounce that, and the French that came in and out. And he talked about how many words became pejorated, that they became less complimentary over time. And it turned out that there are many words that originally were referred to men or women, like nag or witch, or words that we now associate as describing women, which were originally describing both men and women. And I thought that was a very interesting thing that happened in language. I can't think of any of the other words at this moment, but at the time I thought, well, isn't that, I just felt that feeling of the way they make women feel is always a little bit lower. And of course, if you remember, one of Esme's first really bad words was cunt. That was it Mabel in the market?
Yes.
Mabel.
Lizzie was so like, oh my God, you can't possibly use that word.
And then she found out it comes from the 1300s. That it's been in use for
Chaucer, all those people use those words.
And I have feelings about that, because why did that become such a negative thing? Quite fond of my own. And I was in Australia. It's not a word that people say here. It is a very polarizing word, which I learned when I came over here and used it. It's interesting to see what words do and how people
Yep.
respond to them in different countries as well.
Yeah. And yeah,
Oh,
it's
I
in the US.
remember thinking the word bloody hell was just like, oh my gosh, or not,
Yeah.
not a
Right.
big deal. And I was talking to someone from the UK, and I said something like bloody hell, and he was like, oh, and I thought, oh, I didn't know that. I wasn't.
Yeah.
He said it was like
And
saying
horror,
the F word
yeah.
or something, and I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Well,
I'm interested. Go ahead.
go ahead. I was going to say, I have a friend who grew up in South Africa, and
Yeah.
she moved to Cleveland, and she's very noted for dinner parties. She gave a beautiful dinner party shortly after arriving, and she offered more food to someone at the table, and he sort of leaned back and said, "Oh no, I'm stuffed." And in South Africa, "I'm stuffed" means like I'm fucked. And she
Yeah.
was so
I'm
stuffed.
South African. I'm giggling.
Yeah.
I'm giggling and I'm stuffed. Yeah. I'm also interested to know what people did. Were you conscious when you were reading about the UK spelling and grammar? Or does it just,
I didn't even think of it until the
I know.
No, I
question
didn't
came up,
either.
and then I thought, I didn't even notice.
Mm-mm. I
In
didn't
Canada,
either.
we have a foot in both camps. We
Yeah.
we read American, but we use British.
Yeah.
And so to me, yeah, that was totally transparent because that's what I would have done.
Yeah. Now, as a child, I don't know where, but I started spelling labor and honor the British way.
okay.
And I can remember maybe I was in third grade or something, and I got marked down. I mean, got a red mark on my paper because I'd misspelled it.
Ah,
And my father went to school, went to the teacher, and explained that this was a proper spelling, and that that there are variations in spelling, and this was one of them, and it was perfectly fine for his daughter to spell it that way. And I still to this day spell it that way. But yeah, so I don't even catch things like that when I'm reading, one way or the other.
Because
wow.
I've been interested to find more. I mean, I think that people generally apart from your teacher, Wendy, but generally understand about the differences in spelling, but there are also differences in grammar.
Yep.
So there are things like, well, I don't even know if this qualifies as spelling or grammar, but I was really surprised to find that, with United States publications, that using towards instead of toward, putting an
Yep.
S at the end of
Yeah.
forward and toward
Oh.
and so on is considered incorrect.
Yep.
Whereas for us, that is how and that's how I noticed that she uses it. She uses towards.
Mhm.
I used to have an American boyfriend years and years ago who was a journalist and a writer, and he was horrified when I used the word bath. Sorry, that's my accent again. BATH as a verb.
Oh.
Mhm.
It's
Oh,
not
I see.
incorrect for us.
Yeah.
It's not incorrect for us. We can say, "Oh, I need to bath before I go out."
Yeah.
And he was, he was horrified that I would,
Yeah.
say that and not say bathe with an E at the end.
Or take a
So-
bath.
or take a bath. We could say take a bath, but we can also say bath as a
Mhm.
verb and shower as a verb.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's interesting.
So, did you learn anything about Oxford that surprised you? And or did this book make you want to travel to Oxford?
Well, I'll jump in here because I'm
Okay.
planning a trip in the spring to England, and
Oh, wonderful.
Oxford is on my list. It's kind of a sentimental journey to revisit places.
Mhm.
And my grandparents lived about a half hour away from Oxford. So that was why I joined this particular book club, because of the Oxford connection. So
Great.
yes, I'm quite excited at the thought of returning there just as a visitor. But Wendy, you were saying something about events in Oxford related to this novel?
Yeah, there was Sally actually posted just right before this, like a walking tour
Okay.
from this novel that walks through the different areas that relates the novel to Oxford itself, which I thought looked interesting.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
I've actually just saw in the last couple of days here in Australia a theatre production based on this book.
Hmm.
So maybe that will get overseas. I don't know.
I'm going to jump in. You know, there's so many, this book is so rich and so complex. There's so many things we could talk about, but I thought it was really interesting, her development with the actress.
Mhm.
And then, of course, subsequently the brother of the
Yeah.
actress, Bill. But she really had a whole world open to her because she went to that play so many times. And then it turned out that at the moment, I can't remember the actress's name, that it was the actress who introduced the suffragist
Yep.
theme into the book.
And one of the things about the suffragist theme, which, I mean, we're running late, hopefully some of you can stay on for a little bit longer. The suffragist theme I thought was really interesting because I know my grandmother was a suffragette, and that's all I know is that, quote unquote, she was a suffragette. And I've never really thought about the suffragist movement and how there were different factions using different kinds of tactics. I kind of always just assumed it was the ladies walking around with their signs, right? I mean, that's the pictures we see. But you know, here they were really taking a much more proactive approach. So I thought that was really interesting, and it really piqued my interest in maybe doing some research and understanding a little bit about the different types of things that were happening during the suffragette movement.
Yeah, and I just go ahead, Elena.
I was just going to say, believe it or not, this is a coincidence, but just yesterday on social media, I saw a woman had posted a pamphlet from way back in the early 1900s, and it was a group of women who were opposed to it. And it was like, women, no, with a big no, opposed to the suffragist movement.
Like Phyllis Schlafly, or was that her name? Phyllis Schlafly?
It was long before her, but
women belong under the table begging for bread. Yes, they do.
I was fascinated reading that, the exact same thing, Wendy, because reading this book, and I'm so glad this came up and we didn't forget to talk about this, because it's such an important part of the book. Reading the book and reading about the different kind of cliques and factions and so on within the political movement to get voting rights for women. So leaving aside those women that were against it for whatever reason. When I was reading it, I thought, but of course, I mean, we know that now. Every single movement always has an entire spectrum of people, from extreme moderates to extreme militants, or even people who have the same kind of broad political view but just disagree on a strategy of what will work and what won't work and the timing of something. So yeah, of course that would be the case for the suffragists, which I now understand is broader than just the suffragettes. But yeah, it had never occurred to me before.
And then at the same time, if you think about Esme, she was breaking barriers all along. So although, you know, in the pretext, in the background, we have these suffragette movements happening. And again, it's the same kind of thing with any kind of social movement. You can have those that are out in front leading it, but then you have those that are just quietly chipping away and making the strides. And Esme really was working through a lot of those strides. I think her sexual freedom, you know, was a stride. And then, you know, the fact that she was actually doing work that normally men did. I mean, so she was actually living some of those changes while the others were fighting for the changes.
I have to jump in here. Excuse me. I have another Zoom meeting that I have to get.
Well, Linda, thank you for coming. hopefully
It
you'll
was a
join us
pleasure.
again.
I'll check out the next offerings.
I already
Wonderful.
started
Thanks,
it.
Linda.
It's good, Linda. Read it. It's really, I really enjoy it.
Okay,
It's
thanks for
it's
the
Lady
recommendation.
Chan's Circle of Women.
Yep.
It's a good one.
Mine here.
Right. Thank
Great
you.
one.
Bye-bye
Yeah,
now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Nice
Yeah,
to see you again, Linda.
So Sally, I know you've already finished the book, yes? I haven't started
Yes.
it yet, so.
Yes, I have. It's a good read. I did want to just say one more thing. Sorry, I know we're running out of time, but I think it's really important to say about the suffragettes movement and so on is just also because I think that this is somewhere where Esme is a flawed character, but there's a lot of things that do come out in the story about, I guess, the intersectionality of women's rights, but also class issues.
Yeah.
And something that I didn't know was that Pankhurst was willing to sacrifice working class women's votes. And that was a real shock to me that, because we only think of the positive side of these movements. And there were a number of cases where this was really brought out, and I think kind of deserves, what didn't come out is intersectionality with race. I guess there was just only so much this book could cover. But even Esme was really unconscious of Lizzie's lived reality, I think.
Yeah, she had no idea. Yeah.
But she also was able to recognize in when she confronted some of the suffragette women who had sort of brought their maid along as a token +3 to come to their meetings and so on, and delved really interestingly into how, their understanding of women's reality with Gareth's understanding. He's a man, but his understanding, having seen the struggles his mother went through, that these kind of wealthy women would never have noticed. So there's a lot of layers in there, which can't unpack now, but sort of deserve a mention.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that Esme got a grasp when Lizzie shows up and one day and she used that word knackered.
Yeah.
And Esme never heard of that. And then she goes into how early she got up and how she took care of, made breakfast and took care of the kids and took care of the laundry and then cleaned the house. And I think also she really understood bondmaid because of Lizzie. Yep. And then wasn't there a turnaround at the end of the book where she in a way realized that she was Lizzie's bondmaid because she sort of changed the meaning of it a little bit to being, two women who were bonded together.
When I think I'll just say early in the book, she and her father are talking about the word service, someone who's in service. And her father said, and she said, well, when I grow up, will I be in service? He said, oh, no, you will not be in service. And there was, and I wish I could remember how it went, but there's something about, he said, the word service will evoke different emotions in different people. So for Lizzie, she's in service. That's her job. Right. And that's what she can look up to. Whereas for Esme, it would be taking a step down. And he's trying to explain to her the relationship of the word service, which I thought was really interesting. And she said, well, if Lily were around, would she understand it? He said, if Lily was here, she would explain service to you.
Have you read The Professor and the Madman?
No.
That is the same. It's what actually historical fiction, but it's the so the professor is like Dr. Murray.
Yeah.
And the madman is this surgeon who was put in jail for killing his wife. And over the course of the evolution of the OED, he submits thousands of words because he's constantly having people at the prison go get him books, and he's going through it. And so it's really, if you get a chance, it was made into a movie also. I think you can get it on Prime Video. but
Hmm.
it's the same. It's a parallel. It's a good,
Complimentary book.
yeah, it is. I like the idea of this better, but that's a little more historical. It's about what actually there really was a person who submitted thousands of words like
Wow.
that. So
I think I'll stand under correction, but I think I read in one of the interviews with Pip Williams, the author of this book,
Yep.
that was the book that actually got her started
Yes.
thinking about
she
this.
did write that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we're running a little over, but
Yes.
next month is Lady Tan's Circle.
Yes.
Lady
And,
Tan's Circle of Women. Yep.
Yeah.
Is it over there? Found it a very good read.
Me too.
Lots to talk about again.
Me too. Thank you, ladies, for taking
Thank
the
you.
time to do this. And I know it's so much work that goes into it, and it's one of the highlights of my month. I love it.
Oh, Mary.
Has it been 3 years? It's been
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
about 3
Yeah,
years,
since
so I really
2020.
appreciate it.